Hey, so I'm back at my pad and paper, and today I want to talk about why it's so difficult for millennials, especially, to break these like nonstop cycles, mental cycles, work cycles, always chasing money, promotions, more things, accumulation. Um, and the story is brought to you by one of the escapees that I met recently. So someone that I have known for like 20 years and, didn't stay in touch with during the corporate days and all that stuff. But he, ooh, look at that. It's a mirror image. It's hard for me to. Anyways, so he worked in corporate and we lost touch after, 10, 15 years or whatever it was. And then he decided he wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to go out into entrepreneurship, and he knew that I was kind of on my own and trying to do my own thing. So he reached out and we reconnected. We had coffee a handful of times. He was asking really interesting questions about like purpose and meaning of work. Let's call him Gary. Okay. So Gary and I had coffee, and Gary said, I'm so sick of the grind, and with AI coming, he was an engineer and a business person, so he used to review reports and he used to run reports and report information, consolidate information for major companies. By the way, he's worked on like hundreds of millions of dollar deals. Like, he has a really good high level understanding, but a fairly corporate understanding of business transactions and whatnot. And when he started to see the impact of AI in the workplace and how it was going to be able to do more than people, and how profound the impact was going to be in the future about, you know, productivity, function, research, thoroughness, detail, all these kinds of things, he knew like there's like a major shift coming. People are not ready for this, and people aren't addressing it. They're not using it. He saw, leadership and people he really respected not kind of take the bull by the horns and seem to understand what was coming. And so he said, like, I need to get out of here. I need to go build something. I need to leverage this technology. So he got out of the corporate life. And Gary, like I said, he came across my LinkedIn and reached out, and we had coffees. And I was so curious. I was so interested to hear the questions that he was asking about, like purpose and meaning and things like that. And what's the point of making all this money? He didn't see making money as a difficult endeavor. It had become about doing it with the people that he cared about and the mission that he was on. And Gary really wanted to feel fulfilled in his work. And I loved that he was asking those questions. But I said to him, have you challenged what game you're playing? You know, because he kept talking as we were talking about like social impact of companies and businesses and the potential of exploring a business together. You know, he said he cared about giving back and contributing. And then in the next breath, he would talk about multipliers and acquisition costs and IPOs. And he would talk about very corporate things that are like purely numbers based. And the point is not to dispute or refute the value of those things. But Gary's priorities in his mind, it was clear, were still fixated on doing business a certain way, seeing business a certain way. And that's fine. He wanted to make money. So to each his own. There's nothing wrong with that. But the point today was that like Gary was trying to get out of this cycle of making more money, or like the priority always being the money. And I would sit across the table from him when we were having coffee, and I would just think like, man, like you're so entrenched, like his mind was so entrenched in what it was doing and seeing business the way that he had seen it for, 20 years. He was a millennial like me, is a millennial like me. And it really got me thinking about, wow, like you can have great intentions and you can really want to break out of the corporate life. And by the way, he did leave. He wasn't just like making plans, he had already left. He had left like within the last year or something like that. But he still didn't understand his limitations, his mental limitations around the cycle. And so what I wanted to talk about today was like, why is that so difficult? Why is it so difficult? Because it's extremely difficult, by the way. I who am 8 years out of a steady corporate lifestyle. I have worked in a corporate type of position, not for a big company, but I've worked for a company since and within the last 8 years, not for a big one. But I still struggle with like these notions of employee mindset, of how much time I'm giving to the office and how much time I'm giving to a task and those kinds of things. It's not an easy thing to break out of, especially when you've spent your 20s and your 30s learning things. And when I think about these like millennial mindsets and these people who are, by the way, really struggling, like their their work lives are impacting their home lives, their relationships at home, whether with their spouses, with their parents, with their kids, with their hobbies. They take their work with them wherever they go. Why? Like, what is it? So what I'm talking about is those mindsets. Okay, so like kind of like Gary, like how mine used to be. The phone is always on. Gary was always like, even when I met him for coffee, like I would sit down at the table and he would be like on the phone, like stressing because he was like consulting, for some of his former coworkers or teams or other companies. Like he was still trying to make money. I was like, how do you chase this mission, but you're still like 1 foot into the corporate and you're consulting? And he was always like stressed. And then he would hang up the phone and tell me about like, oh, this person is demanding. And I went from having one boss to having 10 bosses now because he's consulting for 10 people. I was like, well, like, okay, good for you. Like you signed up for that, right? Like you chose to answer to these people when you had given yourself freedom. But he's just entrenched in this idea that the money must always continue. I must always give of myself in this way. I must always devote my time in this way to this type of thing. I must always answer to somebody else. I have to constantly be doing. And, if you kind of step back from Gary and you look at like our society and you look at even the corporate culture, we were taught, the more you produce, or the better you produce, the better employee that you are, the more likely you are to get a promotion, which is monetary or it's positions at work, right? And team leads and managers and VPs and whatever it is. So keep going, keep going, keep going. And if it doesn't happen this year, maybe it'll happen next year. And your Christmas bonus depends on it. So keep going and keep going and be reliable and always improving and never stop. And to be fair, that's what productivity meant for a long time. It was whoever gives the most time and effort shall receive the best rewards. Fine, if you want to call that a meritocracy, then so be it, but we're not going to go there. That corporate sort of reinforcement of nonstop, I think, just like leaks into people's personal lives as well. And they come home and I don't know if they crash and burn in the end of the days or whatever. But there's still these notions of like you can't rest, you can't stop. It's difficult to break the cycle, let's just say that. And there are people who do it, who have their hobbies, who, woodwork and use their hands and disconnect their minds and sew or make stuff. Like, maybe I'm refuting my own point by acknowledging that that's a thing that people can actually do, but it's a difficult thing to do. Point being, I was in the middle of trying to just clarify what I was talking about when I say cycles. What does it mean to stop the cycles? What does it mean to stop this incessant need to accumulate more things and to keep pursuing promotions and more money, nicer cars, bigger houses, cabins, and business ownerships, and buy another rental property and rent it out and get more stuff and more, 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 more? Because if you told that person to just stop accumulating money, it wouldn't really make sense, would it? Because they've been taught that their whole life. Like, this is how you do life. you grow and you continue and you expand, and that's the nature of energy and life. Like if you're not growing, you're contracting, so just keep growing, right? It wouldn't make sense to them if you told them to stop. But what does it mean to stop? Like it doesn't have to mean, I don't think it has to mean stop making money. I think it just means balance. I think it means finding an equilibrium between growing and doing and building versus resting and recovering and recharging. And in the appropriate balance, you can find yourself. You could find yourself in a moment, and you can decide how you want to live life instead of bouncing between constant stress and vacation, and like work till you burn and then burn out and crash. And my dad would do this every once in a while. Like he would just crash, he would get sick, and he would rest for like 2 days, and his body would just like tell him like, nope, like we're done. And then we all knew like, he's gonna rest for a little while. And it was kind of this like pendulum. And I don't think that's entirely uncommon. But one can find a balance if they truly understand what they're offsetting. You know what I mean? If you can actually acknowledge that you're producing in a certain way. This is getting a little, it's starting to sound a little introducing too many words, I think. I looked down at my notes because I wrote like 3 or 4 bullet points, before I started talking. Oh, the light is still too bright. Yeah. Okay, so I write notes on the, this is where to go. This is point one, point two, point three, and then I'll like veer off of my own points. So I veered off for between what does it mean to stop these cycles and how does one stop these cycles. I made the point about my dad kind of crashing and resting because I don't think that that's like healthy rest or healthy balance. I think that's like crashing out. And by the way, Gary was no different. He would tell me about how, after keeping himself drugged to produce and work, he would crash after like a few months. And, doing that for enough years just kind of forced him to do something else. But how do you get out of it if you don't even see a problem? I think this is kind of the crux of the point. Like, how do you break out of the cycle if you don't even think that there's something wrong? Like, I think this is the main point here that I spent 13 minutes fucking getting to. I said earlier, if you tell them to stop making money, it just wouldn't make sense. It's because it's what they understand life to be. It's like what they understand productivity to be. It's what they understand, most importantly, their sense of self-worth to be. I was also taught this. I went from valuing my smarts, as in I had to be the smartest person in the room in high school and, the best at everything in high school, to challenging that notion in university when I was not the smartest kid in engineering at all. And then in the workplace, at least I was valued for how much money I made. Like at home, I was valued for that. And then in the workplace, I was valued for the education that I had and whatever else I brought to the table. And, several years later, I got out of there because nothing really resonated and made sense. I was burning out. And it just didn't make sense to me to live my life like that until I died or until they told me to retire and try to accumulate wealth until I could live my life 40 years later. Like it just doesn't compute, like I want to live life all the time. But in the workplace, because we spend so much time there, because we gain so much, as in like monetary, we gain relationships, we gain skills. That's where I think we learn so much about what we are worth, what we are worth to society, what we are worth to our families, whether you're the man or the woman, breadwinner or not, like bringing money home like you are. And by the way, legitimately and fairly, you're putting food on the table for your children. Like that's not a small thing. It's not to underplay the value of putting food on the table. You are literally serving and feeding your kin, your children, your family. I'm not challenging that, but look at what it does to the individual, right? Look at what it does to that person. They now believe that their value is connected to the money that they bring home. They start to believe that their value is connected to the skills that they've developed in the workplace and what they contribute to the workplace and how they serve their clients, the role that they can play in their clients' lives or businesses or whatever it is. It's about that person's sense of self-worth. Like that's my point, is it's so difficult to see things differently because it's your value. It's your value as a person that you have now entangled into these other things, into your job and your money and your ability to provide and your position at work. And well, if I lose my, third investment, at least I'm still a VP of this company. And if I lose my stock investment, at least I still have my car. And if I lose my car, at least I still have my house or my boat or like whatever it is, like monetary possessions. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Go ahead, Kevin Hart, do you, boo boo? Do you? There's nothing wrong with it. But I'm not talking to that person. I'm talking to the person who wants to break the cycle. I'm talking to you, and you're watching this because this resonates. It's not easy to break out of the cycle because it's your sense of self-worth that has been tied up in these things. It's your identity and self-worth. They're so tied together as well. So why do you even think that? Why do you even think that your sense of self-worth is tied to your financial contributions or ability to generate financially? And a lot of these things are much simpler than you think. Why do you think that? It's because that's what you were taught. Like that's it. That's what you were taught. And then you lived in a world and in a society and in a company and in a lifestyle where that was reinforced. You were simply taught that your sense of self-worth came from those things: making money, providing things, doing certain things, having certain titles, being called certain things, approving certain things, like whatever. Like you were taught that that's what you're worth. That's it. What happened after that and why it was reinforced and how you contributed to reinforcing it and how other people did, like that's a different story. You have to start at the beginning. You have to start at point A. It is that way because that's what you were taught. Like this is one of those like perspective mindset, malleable, by the way, things. You have the ability to change this. You can change your mind. You can attach your sense of self-worth to something else. And many people do, by the way. Again, this is not breaking stuff. Some people then turn around and focus on being the best parents that they can be after they have kids. I did it. Like I had a daughter after I left my engineering position, and then I just cared so much about being a great father. Like that's what my life became about. I didn't want to be a great engineer at that stage. It was then about being the best father that I could be, and that became my identity. And that's where I got my sense of self-worth. But it was extremely difficult And then I had to remove that, by the way. I then shifted it away from being a father because I realized how much I was putting on the child. I was leaving it up to my daughter to tell me that I was a great father, and not in words, but through behaviors and time and actions and whatever it is. I realized that I was placing my sense of self-worth externally once again in the hands of someone or something else. And the only real way to own this is to keep it within yourself. The only real way to have autonomy and ownership of your mindset, of your emotions, is to validate yourself and to validate your own self worth. And that comes from knowing your value, not waiting for something else, anything else to tell you that you are valuable, to validate that you are valuable. And they don't teach this in school, obviously. I mean, they're starting to now, I will say. Curriculum's come a long way. I'm in Canada. It's not perfect by any means, but it sure has come a long way where at least schools can address this topic. But as the millennial, we didn't learn that in school. We didn't learn it from our parents. We didn't learn it from the office. We didn't learn it from our TV shows. We didn't learn it from our role models growing up. Today, things are changing. It's going to be much easier for younger generations to embrace this concept, thankfully. But if you're a millennial, you have a lot more work to do. You have a lot more things to unpack, to adjust your validation pathways, your sense of self-worth, your identity. And I think that's the only real way to break out of these cycles, these patterns of thinking that you have to keep doing things in order to be considered valuable, that you have to keep making money, that you have to keep buying new things and bigger things. There's no end to that. There will always be more money. There will always be bigger things to buy. There will always be somebody ahead of you. Go look at how millionaires compare to each other and how billionaires compare to each other, and how the biggest, richest families still just want to be the number one. Like, they will, for the 99.99999% of people, like, what game would you be playing anyways? Like, there will always be someone ahead. So why are you valuing those things that will never really have an end goal? Like, you never can really achieve enough if you don't think it's enough. And there are people who do this, but for the people who work their way up the ranks from managers to VPs to bosses to owners and sitting on boards, like, there will always be bigger companies to grow. There will always be more revenue to generate. Like, it's just a never ending thing. If you see it attached to, validating who you are and what makes you valuable, it will never stop. So be careful of, by the way, the other middle chunk point here that I didn't entirely tie off was the shift that's occurring in technology and in society and in business now, because we have AI that is kind of removing, or it's readjusting our sense of productivity. Like, after the Industrial Revolution and after World War II, and for that kind of era before the internet really took over, more time meant more productivity. And then the people who put in the most time and worked the hardest and were always available and gave of themselves constantly, like, they were the ones who produced the most. And then the internet started to kind of shuffle that around a little bit, where people could leverage, digitization, whether that's communication or digital products or whatever it is. More time didn't necessarily mean more productivity. And now we're going exponential with it because there's AI, and more time, more effort certainly does not mean more productivity and more money and more, better validation and more likelihood to get a promotion and stuff like that. So the kids are going to grow up in a different era, in a different world than the millennials did. And the millennials have the joy and honor of knowing what it was like in an analog world and playing lawn darts and getting Nintendos in our childhoods all the way up till now. AI is disrupting your job and you're nowhere close to retirement. So you have some adjusting to do. But the point is still about how do you break out of the cycle? How do you adjust your mindset? Understand the leverage player, understand that it has a lot to do with your identity and what you value, and understanding that you are not simply the work that you produce with your paper and pen or your mouse and keyboard. You are valuable as a person, you know? And that's something that really isn't taught or conveyed, is just being you is definitely good enough for your children, right? And you've heard this already. If you scroll and if you whatever, it might be a Tuesday night to you, but to your children it's their entire childhood. So when you come home and you don't have enough of yourself to give to your children, you're making a choice. You're devoting your energy to something instead of to your children or your families or whatever it is. And again, it's not a knock on anyone. A lot of people don't have choices. They have to work certain time, but the child values you. The child values you for you. And I think, you know beginning of life, end of life is the closest we get to the other dimension of whatever non-physical world. And as kids learn about life and the world, I think, like, you can watch their innocence kind of like leave. They get conditioned and they understand the limits of the physical world more and more. But they connect differently. They connect to you. They don't connect to your money. They don't connect, in it, at least initially. They don't connect with your car, and they don't care about your job and your job title. They just want you. And I think that's such a beautiful gift that children especially offer us, is being able to shine a light on that, and bring that perspective to us adults who've been conditioned to believe that our value is attached to these physical things, these worldly things. And what a beautiful thing to learn from a child, you know. And Gary has children, by the way. He missed a lot of their childhood. He was not happy about it, but he still didn't understand what he missed. Like, it was so clear, like, oh, you don't even know. You missed so much of their beautiful development, and you missed how they missed you. Like, he didn't know that they, I think, loved him for him and not the stuff he bought them. That was tough to hear. I couldn't correct him, because you don't correct people, or you don't just like push that on people. You break brains that way. I think I should stop, because that's 28 minutes, 29 minutes. But this one hits, this topic, this cycle, these things that we get caught up on really hits home for me. Like I said earlier, had to shift where I was placing my sense of self-worth several times, and I am proud of myself for doing it. And it was excruciating. It's not an easy thing to do. Maybe a topic for another day. Thanks for watching, if you did.